Hi, I'm Corey. Welcome to Creating with Scraps. I had originally intended to show a week's worth of pages for Junk Journal January and little bits of lace at one time. But after making today's page, I realized that this is one, most of them will just be kind of a flip through and I'll walk you through how to do it. But this one, it was one that might be better understood if I show how it's done. So I thought I would make an exception, and I may do that again down the road, and show you how to make this page. The prompt for day one in Junk Journal January is resolutions. And I generally don't tend to make resolutions simply because I set myself up for failure. At least I feel like I am. So I make goals or intentions or things that I hope to accomplish. And so that's what I did with this one. Rather than doing resolutions, I did goals, just a couple simple creative type goals that I had. And I made a lace pocket to put the goals in. So I thought I would show you how I make that lace pocket. Additionally, I had so many things that I wanted to cover in the initial video that I forgot something really crucial. And I made this for my last page. Tracy Fox from Tracy Fox Creative, who was joining me on this, did a beautiful, and here I'll show you, on her Ko-fi account, she did beautiful little monthly calendars with lace backing. So she has a lighter lace for the month itself and the days, and then it's framed with this beautiful lace backing. And I'll link Tracy's Ko-fi account below so that if you'd like these, you're welcome to get them. But I had forgotten to mention it previously, and I wanted to use them in my own journal. So what I did is I cut these down to fit inside the journal that I'm using. Now, if I were using a bigger journal, maybe I would put 3 on a page or 4 on a page or whatever. Because of the size journal that I'm working with, mine is 4 inches by 3.5 inches. But because of the size, I needed my pieces a little bit smaller, but I also wanted them to be interactive. So I cut them down to 1.5 inches by 2 3/4 inches. Most of them, a couple of them, because of the number of days and where they fell, I had to make them a little bit bigger, but they still fit just fine. And then instead of making it their own slot for each one, I put 3 per slot. And then I can tuck them wherever they need to go inside this journal as I'm creating it. So I did it front and back, and I made that my very back page. Now, this is a lace idea book, and I didn't put lace on this, but Tracy's video for today is fabulous, and she shows different ways to use these with lace. She makes the lace side tuck, she makes the lace bottom panels. They're beautiful. So please do check those out. And yeah, and I'll show you super quickly how I did this. I used vellum to make these pockets, but of course you could use anything that you've got. You could use window film or transparency. You could use tracing paper, coffee dyed tracing paper, what have you. I just wanted to be able to see the calendars through the window. And what I did is I used vellum and a piece of green paper that I'll make this into a pocket somewhere else in the page. I just took a rectangular scrap, and folded it in half. And then I took the piece of vellum and I wrapped it around so that it would be equidistant on both sides, right? Then I opened this back up and I used tape to hold these edges in place. And then I sewed along the top, in the middle, and on the bottom. And that was it. When I was done, I cut right along this edge, and then I laid it right inside my book and glued it down in place. And if you don't sew, if you're not a person who's a fan of sewing, you can use glue or whatever adhesive you like. There's different kinds of tape and adhesive. Different people have different preferences, but that's what I did. I just sewed straight down. And then once I had the pages inside the book, I glued them together so that it would just be one solid page. So I glued it on each side of these little hidden spine hinge seams that I created. So that's how I did that back page. And the way I did this lace pocket, and I'll pull it up close so hopefully you can see it. The way I did the lace pocket is these are truly just random little itty bitty bits. I had this bin of lace and I took it and I dumped it. And then I ironed it, and I'll show you in just a sec how I ironed it because I don't usually use an iron when I craft. But I ironed them and then I glued them down on paper, and then I sewed them in place. Now, I sewed them in place because I used small bits. If you're somebody who likes slow stitching, you could do it that way. You could just use glue if you like, but I really like the effect that stitching gives. And I did that to the front and the back. And then I cut my rectangle at an angle because I wanted the word goals to peek out the top. So after I had done, just took that rectangle and folded it in half, glued my lace, sewed my lace in place, and then I cut it at a rectangle so it would hold this fold over bit that had my crafting goals for the year. And for this piece, I just took some scraps of lace, and I had found this in the dish on top of my desk. So I used this charm with some scraps of lace to stick outside the pocket. Now, for day 2, I'll probably use the back, and I'll do something a little bit different because day 2 is quotes. And so I'll do something with a quote and have the quote come down the side. But the lace pocket I made front and back. And I'll show you really quickly. It's very, very simple to do. I will say it is much easier with a sewing machine, but you could slow stitch it. Or if you just use large pieces of lace, then you're not using lace scraps. Though this one is designed to use lace scraps. And you can see there's just all different kinds of small bits. And the way I did that was I got a scrap. Well, here you can literally see I got a scrap of card and a rectangular scrap of card, and I folded it in half. And I've already made the one for that book, so I'll just make this one to use in a different project or on a different book. Folded it in half. Then I opened it up and I folded it just to make sure that it lined up where I wanted it to. Then I'm going to move the sewing machine slightly out of the way, but I will show you how I finished it off. So then I put my scrap down on a piece of scrap paper or a glue book if you use a glue book, and I used my Yoo-hoo stick. And a lot of times when we use glue stick, we make it thin on purpose because we want paper to stick to paper. Well, this time I want lace, so I'm actually kind of going a little thick on this. I'm not making it as thin as I would because I want it to stay wet a little bit longer. And if I need to add more, I certainly can. But I'm making it a little thicker than I normally would. I'm not pushing down quite so hard because I don't want chunks of glue, but I kind of want chunks of glue. So I've got my glue in place, and I'll grab a different sheet, lay it down here, and then I just start getting scraps. Now, the way I did these, because they were all jumbled and they were all a mess, I generally don't use an iron when I'm crafting, and I know many people don't, but I got a couple of these at yard sales over time, and they're the, what are these things called? Hair straighteners, there you go. And nothing cost-wise, and I use these to straighten my bits of lace. So I just turn this on, keep it next to my desk, and when I need to iron something, I just use that. Right, then I start randomly laying down little scraps of lace. Now, there's not a lot of, here you can see that one is still needing to be ironed. It's not flat. And it doesn't have to be flat, but I find that it works a lot better when it's flat. And I also, when I do this, maybe I'll zoom in just a smidge, I overlap it just a little bit and I have it hang over the bottom of my page. And really, it doesn't have to look a certain way. The sewing really makes a huge difference in making it look uniform. I'm honestly just grabbing random scraps of lace. There's no rhyme, no reason to it. If I feel like I need a specific color in an area, I'll put a different color in an area just to mix it up a little bit. If I don't have enough coverage in some place, then I'll add a little bit of coverage, lift things up, push things down. It It does not in any way, shape, or form have to be perfect or even, or, you know, just use the scraps you've got. You know, if that's the look you like. Oh, here's a nice big piece. These are all what I would call or consider offcuts. So when I'm done using some lace on something, I will save the little leftover bits. And that's what these are. These are just those little leftover bits. And, you know, I'll move it around to make it the way I like it. And again, I can still feel the tacky glue underneath. You can see that lace is kind of sheer, so it doesn't necessarily give the look I want. So I'll use little pieces to fill in that. That's the same kind of as there. Well, that's kind of pretty. I'll put that there. And there's no reason you can't do a couple layers too if need be. If you've got, you know, like I said, I've got that sheer one right there. And here you go. You can see that's not straight or flat. So I'll just crimp it. And I'll put that right there. Okay, so that's that side. And then I'll turn it around and do the other side. You can see it's not perfect by any means, way, shape, or form. And this one needs a little bit of something there. Oh, here we go. That's kind of a cute little piece. This is just some lace tatting. And you can see I save the smallest scraps. And that area is dried out a bit, so I'll put a little bit of glue back on here. And lay that down. Okay. Now, same idea on the other side. This is kind of thick, and I don't know that I would necessarily use something that thick because you can see I'll use this for something else, but this might be a little thicker than I want for this particular project. This is starting to get a little dry, so we'll just lay down some more. I didn't even trim that off. You can see it's just loose. Oh, there's another thick piece. How about that right there? Is that the same? No, that's a different kind of lace. So I'm just trying to mix up the colors and the styles on the lace that I'm grabbing. Oh, that's kind of pretty. That's a really old one. Here we go. Oh, that's a really big piece, but that's okay. If it's a really big piece, I can overlap it or I can just cut it down, and I'll save this piece to use somewhere else because I want a straight edge right there. So I'll lay that on here. And what else have I got? I don't love using acrylic lace quite as much simply because it doesn't iron as well, I don't think. But if that's what I had, that's what I grabbed, that's absolutely what I would use. All right, oh, here, that's a really pretty piece. That has an ugly spot on it, so I'll flip it over. All right, and I would call that good. So here you can see I've got just random scraps and bits of lace glued down. Now, because I don't want to gum up my machine, I wait until the glue is completely dry before I run it through my sewing machine. And I'll move this stuff out of the way now. And if I'm sewing and I find something moves and I've got an open space, I'll just grab another little bit of a scrap and put it right on top. So I wait until that dries, push it aside, wait till it dries, and then once it's dry, I run it through my machine. Now, I could sew it perfectly as far as using the guides on the machine. I sew on the top, right? I use the guides on the machine to make them evenly spaced and perfectly straight. But you know what? I feel like with this type of a project, it adds more character to just, you know, about is close enough. You can see this is a lot wider apart and these are narrower together, and this is a little wider and this is a little wider, and it had to do with where I needed to sew down the lace on the top. But I just feel like that gives it a more, I don't know, random fun look. Then and you can go either direction, length or width. You don't have to do nearly as many stitches as I did, but you certainly can. And this is what it looks like before it's trimmed. So when I've got it sewn all the way straight up and down or straight across, whichever I want it. Then I'm going to come in and trim it. Now, I find it works easiest to use the rotary cutter for this, but that's just a personal preference. If you don't have a rotary cutter, let's see, I have two, and I like alliteration, so I use purple for paper, and this is when I'm just cutting fabric. They're not spendy at all, but anyway, I prefer using a rotary cutter with that. And then I get a clear blade, and then I will come and trim up the edges. And I will save these pieces because I like to use them for clusters. So yeah, you can see I've cut this on paper, so it doesn't always work as well. And then I'll save this because that's a great piece, and that could make a fun trim on something, or would be really pretty in a cluster. So I tend to save those. So I'll trim all the way around. And I could line it up here to make sure it's perfectly straight, and you know, I probably should. Well, perfectly. Perfectly is kind of a loosely used term. I very rarely do anything perfectly, but I want it about a certain way. And then I'll trim that bit off. All right, then my next step, and the reason I left my machine out, is when I'm at this point, I want to finish off those lace bits. I like it, well, like you saw in there, I like it tatty and loose and raggedy at the edges, but I don't want them to lift up. So once I've trimmed it down, I will go with my machine and I'll sew all the way around. Now, if I were going to make it an angled pocket like I did on the previous one, I would just cut it down here. I would just cut it at this angle and then sew around it with that angle cut. But because this one isn't going in that particular journal, and I'll just put it in my supply stash, I am going to sew all the way around the edge so that I'm not going to sew it closed, so that I can put this in a signature if I want to, or I can glue it closed later. I'll be able to use it. I have more options with ways to use it by just sewing around all the way around the edge. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. So you can see they're not straight, not tidy, not well done. Let's see if I can angle the camera a little bit better so you can see it. So most machines, this is called a foot, and there's all different kinds, and I am not a sewing expert in any way, shape, or form. But there's little lines and little guides on these feet, and you can use those lines to make sure that what you're sewing is mostly straight. Again, doesn't have to be perfect, so I'm going to line it up in my machine, and I am going to sew all the way around the edge. And it'll be quick. I did a little one on purpose. You can do them any size you want, whatever scraps you've got. I didn't use copy paper because that would be a little too thin, but I also didn't use cardstock to put the lace on because the double layers would make it really a thick pocket. Lace itself creates a certain thickness. So I use kind of a medium weight paper. Now, after you coffee dye paper, I find that it tends to get a little thicker than when you started. And so on this particular one, I used a coffee dyed scrap. I'm going to sew it all the way around. And I'm going to backstitch so that that doesn't come unraveled. Just a tip for those of you who might be new to sewing. I keep a small pair of scissors just for the threads, and that way they're always sharp and they always cut the threads really well. I don't have to worry about them being, dull or frayed. Just personal preference. All right, then you can see I sewed all the way around the edge, and again, not in any way, shape, or form perfect. And then my pocket is ready to use. Now, when I've got this point, if I folded it over and there was a little piece that wasn't sewn down, I could go back in and sew right over it, and it wouldn't show. This has a loose bit. I'm just going to cut that off. There we go. So you can see, and I can use the pocket this way. I can flip the pocket over this way. However I want to use it. I can make it front and back. Anyway, that's how you make these kind of pockets. Now, I could sew it together at this point, sew, and then tuck something in here. But again, I want to be able to wrap it around a page if I choose to, or to make it part of an insert if I like. I guess I still could use it this way. I could make a large pocket this way, you know, just sew it down on 3 sides or glue it down on 3 sides of my page and make a larger pocket if I were using a larger journal. So that is how you use little itty bits of scrap lace to make a lace scrap pocket. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for all the kind comments, and I'm excited about this. I've had people message me today and say, yes, sorry you didn't ask earlier, Corey, but yes, we'll join in. Maybe not today or tomorrow or the next day, but sometime in January or sometime this year. I've got some ideas for ways to use lace, and I just feel like we can all benefit from sharing those ideas. Take care. Thank you for watching, and happy creating.